Hey, my name is Jason, and this is the unfortunate story of how I discovered that my wife was both a liar and a cheater. Not only that, but she was also willing to commit paternity fraud. I stood in the hospital room, my fingers gripping the railing of the hospital bed as I gazed down at my wife, Emily. She looked exhausted, beads of sweat still clinging to her forehead. But there was something else in her expression, something unsettling that didn't sit right with me. The nurse gently placed a newborn in my arms, and I felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. I had always imagined this moment to be filled with pure happiness, yet instead, my mind drifted back to my father's words from years ago. Son, when you get married and have kids, always get a paternity test. Not because you distrust your wife, but because a man should never leave room for doubt. Assurance of paternity is a man's right. It wasn't an idea I had come up with on my own. My father had ingrained it in me long before I even met Emily. When our relationship became serious, I had casually mentioned it to her once. She had laughed it off, calling it ridiculous, but she never argued against it. So, as I sat in that hospital room, holding what I believed to be my child, I decided to follow through with what I had always planned. I think I'll get a paternity test, I said, keeping my tone casual. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Emily stiffened in her hospital bed, her eyes widening, hands clutching the sheets tightly. Her mother, who had just been doting over the baby, turned to me with sheer disbelief written all over her face. What? Emily's voice was hoarse, but there was an unmistakable sharpness behind it. I'm going to get a test, I repeated firmly, just to be sure. It's something my dad always advised me to do. It's not about you, it's just... Emily's mother cut me off. That is the most insulting thing I've ever heard. How could you say that to her right after she gave birth? Emily's breathing became erratic, her face twisting in anger. You think I cheated on you? She demanded. I shook my head. I never said that. It's just for reassurance. Her voice rose with frustration. Reassurance? I'm your wife. The fact that you're even asking for this means you don't trust me. I frowned, suddenly feeling uneasy. Emily, we talked about this before. It's nothing personal. Well, it sure as hell feels personal, she snapped. And I'm telling you right now, if you go through with this, we're done. I will not stay married to someone who thinks so little of me. My heart pounded. The hostility, the defensiveness, the sheer desperation in her voice. It wasn't normal. If she had nothing to hide, why was she reacting this way? My voice remained calm but firm. Why are you so against it? It's just a simple test, she scoffed. Because it's absurd. Why do you even want to do it? I met her gaze. Why don't you want me to? Silence. A long, heavy silence. I felt my stomach drop. I exhaled, shaking my head. There was no point in arguing. I already had my answer. Without another word, I gently placed the baby back in the bassinet and walked out. As I drove home, my phone buzzed nonstop. Emily, her mother, texts, calls, voicemails. I ignored them all. I wasn't going to be manipulated. When I arrived home, my parents were waiting for me. I told them everything. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. She refused the test. I nodded. My mother folded her arms. Then make her take one. I frowned. How? Get a lawyer. File for it. You have the right to know Jason. If she had nothing to hide, she wouldn't be acting like this. It made sense. I had never considered legal action before, but the moment he suggested it, I knew it was the right move. Emily resisted at first, of course. She cried, she screamed. She sent her friends to guilt-trip me, calling me a horrible husband. But once my lawyer got involved, she finally gave in. And when the results came back, my world shattered. 0% probability of paternity. I wasn't the father. Deep down, I had suspected it, but seeing it in writing made it real. I stared at the paper in my hands, feeling hollow. She had lied to me, deceived me, and made me believe I was about to raise my own child. I clenched my jaw and drove home. I was done pretending to be civil. Emily was already waiting for me, sitting on the couch, looking small and fragile. Her eyes were red and puffy. She had been crying. Good. I hoped she cried every night for the rest of her life. I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It's official. I'm not the father. She flinched as if I had struck her. Jason, please. I'm filing for divorce, I stated flatly. She scrambled toward me, grabbing my hands in desperation. No, please. Just listen to me. I yanked my hands away. Listen to what? More lies. Tears streamed down her face. It was a mistake. I swear. I never meant for it to happen. I thought maybe you could be the father. I thought you'd never find out, and I just wanted. I held up a hand. Stop talking. She bit her lip, choking back more sobs. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay composed. You let me believe that child was mine. You let me sit in that hospital room, holding him, thinking he was my son. You would have let me sign that birth certificate. She buried her face in her hands. Because I love you. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You don't love me, Emily. You love what I gave you. Stability, loyalty. You love that I was willing to raise a child that wasn't mine. But guess what? I'm not. Her entire body trembled with sobs. Jason, please. We can fix this. He still needs a father. I took a step back. He has one. And it's not me. She reached for me again, but I moved out of her grasp. Goodbye, Emily. I turned and walked away. And this time, I never looked back. The divorce was finalized within months. Emily begged me to reconsider, to stay. She even tried to guilt-trip me, arguing that the baby needed a father figure. Her mother pulled the same manipulative nonsense, claiming that real men would have stepped up. Thankfully, her father had more sense. He eventually shut them both down and even apologized to me. But none of that mattered. I wasn't a father, and I never would be. The day my wife gave birth to another man's child was the day I walked away from her, and I never regretted it. Emily's perspective. Hey, this is Emily, and before you make any harsh judgments, let me tell my side of the story. I made a mistake, a terrible one, but let me explain. I don't know why I did it. I don't know why I let myself destroy everything. It started as a simple night out. Nothing more. Just a way to breathe. To escape the suffocating weight of responsibilities, work, and the monotonous routine of married life. Jason and I were happy, weren't we? Or at least, I thought we were. But that night, I needed something, a release. Then I met him. He was charming. The kind of man who knew exactly what to say and how to say it. He made me feel seen. It wasn't love. It wasn't even deep. But for those fleeting moments, it was different. Something that made me forget who I was, where I was supposed to be. I shouldn't have given him my number. I shouldn't have texted him back. I shouldn't have let it spiral into the worst mistake of my life. But I did. And the guilt, God, the guilt. It crushed me the moment it was over. I rushed home, climbed into bed beside Jason, and stared at the ceiling, my stomach churning with sickness, wondering what have I done? The next night, I made sure I was with my husband. I clung to him, hoping that being in his arms could erase the stain of my betrayal. I convinced myself that if I just moved forward, if I never let it happen again, it would fade into nothingness. I should have been smarter. I should have used protection. But I didn't. And when I found out I was pregnant, I did what anyone in my position would do. I prayed. I prayed that Jason was the father, that the timeline worked in my favor, that the universe wouldn't punish me for my one moment of weakness. I never wanted to hurt him. I never wanted to destroy our marriage. But then, in that hospital room, when he asked for the one thing I never prepared for, I felt my world crumble. A paternity test. I had forgotten we ever talked about it. Forgotten it was something he always planned to do. Something logical, routine, unemotional. To him, it was just a precaution. To me, it was a death sentence. I panicked. I lashed out. I fought back, hoping, praying, that if I framed it as an attack on our love, he would back down. But Jason wasn't stupid. He saw my fear. He saw my guilt. And then he left. The moment he walked out of that hospital room, I knew I had lost him. I tried to hold on. I begged. I let my mother and my friends fight for me. I played every desperate card I had. But nothing worked. Because Jason wasn't the father. And Jason wasn't a fool. The divorce papers came faster than I expected. I told myself I still had time, that I could make him stay. But when the results came in, there was nothing left to fight for. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he had never loved me. And maybe, after what I did, he didn't. Now I'm alone. Jason is gone, and I can't even blame him. The worst part, I have to find him. The man I threw everything away for in one reckless, thoughtless decision. The real father. The man I barely even know. Because now I have a baby who needs a dad. And the only man I ever wanted in that role walked away.